In a secluded corner of Norway, hidden beneath a massive earthen mound that has withstood 12 centuries of wind and snow, a team of archaeologists recently made a discovery that has fundamentally shifted our understanding of the Viking Age. As the heavy clay was meticulously peeled away, a ghostly silhouette began to emerge from the mud, the unmistakable prow of a Viking longship. But this wasn't just a discarded vessel or a wreck. It was a time capsule, sealed with such precision that the wood still bore the individual carvings of the craftsmen who shaped it more than a millennium ago. As the scientists breached the hull of this 1,200-year-old vessel, they expected to find the remnants of a powerful chieftain. What they found instead, perfectly preserved in the anaerobic blue clay, was a scene so haunting and a selection of remains so puzzling that it suggests a dark, ceremonial ritual that the history books have never dared to record. We aren't just looking at a burial. We are looking at a frozen moment of ancient belief, and the secrets being whispered by these preserved bodies are rewriting everything we thought we knew about the Viking soul. For decades, the popular image of the Viking has been one of a wild raider, a seafaring warrior destined for Valhalla. But this discovery, known now as the Oseberg Finds' mysterious successor, reveals a much more nuanced and perhaps more unsettling reality. When the air first hit the interior of the ship, the researchers were stunned by the preservation. Usually, after 1,200 years, organic material is a distant memory, but the specific soil conditions created an airtight seal, preserving not just the oak timbers of the ship but delicate textiles, down-filled pillows, and most crucially, the physical remains of the occupants. Inside the burial chamber, 2 women were found. The scientific community struggled to identify them. Were they royalty? Were they priestesses? But as modern forensic technology, including high-resolution DNA sequencing and strontium isotope analysis, was applied to these 1,200-year-old remains, a darker narrative began to crystallize. The ritualistic nature of the ship became apparent the moment they began cataloging the grave goods. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a supplied expedition for the afterlife. There were 14 horses, 3 dogs, and even an ox, all ceremonially placed within the vessel. But it was the positioning of the 2 human figures that raised the most alarms. One woman was in her late 70s, showing signs of a life of high status but also incredible physical struggle toward the end. The second woman was much younger, in her late 20s. At first, it was assumed they were mother and daughter, or perhaps a queen and her servant. However, the genetic data revealed something startling. They weren't related at all. More importantly, the younger woman's remains showed evidence of a traumatic end that didn't align with a natural passing. To understand why this is causing such a stir in the world of history and science, we have to look at the ship itself. A Viking ship wasn't just a mode of transport, it was a living entity, a dragon of the sea. To bury such a valuable piece of technology was a massive sacrifice for the community. It suggests that whatever was happening inside that mound was of ultimate spiritual importance. The ship was packed with ornate sledges, a ceremonial cart covered in carvings of twisting serpents, and chests of precious fabrics. These items weren't meant to be seen by the living. They were meant to serve the occupants on a journey across the threshold of existence. But the dark ritual at the heart of this find isn't just about the wealth. It's about the social technology of the Viking Age, the way they used the transition from this life as a way to cement power and belief. As scientists delved deeper into the younger woman's remains, they found traces of a specific type of pollen in her digestive tract, along with certain chemical markers that suggest she was kept in a highly sedated state during the final hours of the ceremony. This points to a controlled, perhaps even staged ritual. In many ancient cultures, the transition to the afterlife required a guide or a companion. The Viking accounts written by travelers like Ahmad ibn Fadlan in the 10th century describe horrifying ceremonies where a servant would choose to follow their master into the burial mound. For centuries, historians dismissed these accounts as exaggerations or Orientalist fantasies designed to make the Vikings look more primitive. But the forensic evidence from this newly opened ship confirms the grim details of Ibn Fadlan's journals. The younger woman was likely a sacrificial companion, a human vessel intended to carry the older woman's status into the halls of the gods. The preservation of the ship has allowed scientists to reconstruct the actual theatricality of the burial. This wasn't a quick process. The ship was hauled miles inland from the fjord, a gargantuan task requiring hundreds of people and dozens of oxen. A massive trench was dug, and the ship was lowered into it. Then the ritual began. It likely lasted for days. We see evidence of feasts that transition into solemn ceremonies. The animals were taken one by one, their remains placed strategically to form a perimeter of protection around the central chamber. The wooden carvings on the sledges depict scenes from Norse mythology, monsters being bound, gods in conflict, all designed to ward off malevolent spirits that might interfere with the journey. But here is where the science gets truly mind-blowing. By using a technique called strontium isotope mapping, researchers can determine exactly where a person grew up by the minerals stored in their teeth. When they tested the older woman, the queen, the results showed she was local, a pillar of the community. They found a different story. Her isotopes matched a region hundreds of miles away, possibly in the British Isles or the far east of the Baltic. This reveals a dark logistics of the Viking world. They were bringing people from the edges of their known world specifically to serve as high-value sacrifices in these elite burials. The companion wasn't just a servant. She was an exotic offering, someone whose very presence in the mound added to the prestige of the burial. As the team moved toward the rear of the ship, they found a collection of seeds and herbs that provide a glimpse into the medicinal and perhaps visionary world of the Vikings. They found henbane, a plant known for its powerful hallucinogenic properties. This suggests that the priestesses, the Velva involved in the ritual, were using more than just chant and prayer to connect with the divine. They were likely operating in an altered state of consciousness, acting as the bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The younger woman may have been under the influence of these substances during her final moments, making her a living bridge for the elite woman's soul. The darker side of these rituals often gets sanitized in modern tellings of Viking history, but science is forcing us to confront the reality. This was a society that viewed life as a cycle of debt and honor. To give one's life to accompany a leader was seen, in their eyes, as an act of supreme loyalty. But the high-resolution imaging of the remain reveals the physical reality. The younger woman's collarbone showed signs of being gripped with extreme force, and her positioning suggests she was placed in the chamber while the air was still in her lungs. The dark ritual isn't just about the act itself, but about the total conviction of the community that this was a necessary, even holy act for the survival of their people. What's even more fascinating is that this ship was re-entered shortly after it was buried. For a long time, archaeologists thought this was grave robbing, crooks looking for gold and silver, but the new analysis shows that the intruders didn't take any of the precious metals. They ignored the silver ornaments and the fine textiles. What they took instead were specific bones from the older woman. They removed her arm bones and her skull. This wasn't a robbery, it was a secondary ritual. It seems the Viking community returned to their ancestors to reclaim a piece of their power. By taking the bones of a powerful ancestor, they were literally bringing her back to help the living. This suggests that the mound wasn't a final resting place, but a warehouse of spirit that could be accessed in times of need. The DNA analysis has also thrown a curveball at our understanding of Viking genetics. We often think of them as a homogeneous group of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scandinavians. But this ship burial proves otherwise. The diversity within this single mound is incredible. It shows a culture that was highly mobile, bringing in DNA from across Europe and the Near East. The Vikings were a globalized society more than a millennium ago, but that globalization had a very dark undercurrent of human trafficking and ceremonial violence. The younger woman's genetic profile is a haunting reminder that the Viking expansion was fueled by the movement of people who had no choice in their destination. As the scientist reconstructed the older woman's face using 3D scanning technology and muscle layering software, a formidable image emerged. This wasn't just a grandmother, determined jawline, and evidence of a hormonal imbalance that would have given her a more masculine appearance, a trait often associated with the powerful women or shield maidens described in the sagas. Her life was etched into her bones. She had survived childhood illness. She had traveled extensively, and she was clearly revered, but the dark ritual surrounding her passings suggests that her power was so great that her community feared what would happen if she didn't have a guide in the next world. The ship itself is a masterpiece of engineering, and its presence in the burial is a scientific miracle. Because it was sealed so quickly, the wood cells haven't collapsed. This allows us to see how they treated the timber. They used green wood, meaning the oak was carved while it was still wet and flexible. This gave the ship its famous flexibility in the waves. But it also means that burying it was a race against time. If the wood dried out before the mound was sealed, the ship would crack and lose its spiritual integrity. The community worked with a feverish intensity to seal the mound, creating a pressurized chamber that kept the dragon alive for 1,200 years. When we look at the textiles found on the ship, the story gets even more intricate. They found silk that originated in the Byzantine Empire, thousands of miles to the south. This silk was painstakingly unpicked and rewoven into Viking patterns. Imagine the labor involved, taking a luxury item from the Mediterranean and Vikingizing it. These fabrics were used to shroud the bodies, creating a layer of protection that was both physical and symbolic. The dark ritual involved wrapping the deceased in the wealth of the world, ensuring that when they stood before the gods, their status was undeniable. But why the trauma? Why the sacrifice? The answer lies in the Viking concept of the fylgja. This was a spirit companion that everyone was believed to have, usually in the form of an animal. But powerful individuals were thought to have multiple fylgja, some of them human. The younger woman was likely transformed, through the ritual of the burial, into the older woman's eternal fylgja. She was no longer a person, she was a spiritual extension of the queen. By opening this ship, scientists have actually intercepted a process of becoming that the Vikings believed would last for eternity. The mystery of the ship's location is also significant. Most Viking burials are near the water, facing the sea. This mound was placed in a spot that was invisible from the fjord, but highly visible from the local valley. It was a monument to the neighbors. It was a way for the family to say, "The woman we loved is so powerful that we sacrificed a ship and a life to send her off." It's a display of social dominance that used the dark ritual as its primary language. The forensic evidence of the animals, many of which were placed with their heads facing the burial chamber, confirms this audience aspect. The horses were meant to be ridden, the dogs to protect, and the ox to feed. As researchers used ground-penetrating radar (GPR) around the site, they discovered that this ship wasn't alone. It was part of a constellation of mounds. Though most had been destroyed by centuries of farming, this ship only survived because the farmer who owned the land believed the mound was cursed. For 1,000 years, local folklore protected the site. People whispered that anyone who disturbed the longship in the hill would never see the spring. This cultural seal was just as effective as the blue clay. It kept the dark ritual undisturbed until the era of modern science could handle the weight of the discovery. One of the most unsettling finds was a wooden bucket, perfectly preserved, containing the remains of wild apples. When scientists analyzed the DNA of the apples, they found they were of a particularly bitter wild variety. These weren't for eating, they were offering fruit. Apples in Norse mythology are associated with the goddess Ithun and the secret of eternal youth. Placing these bitter apples in the grave was a literal attempt to stall the process of decay, a poetic but doomed effort to keep the occupants ready for the moment they reached the other side. The younger woman's life, when reconstructed through her bone density and joint wear, showed that she worked hard right up until the end. She wasn't a lady of leisure. She was a weaver, a worker, a person of the earth. The dark ritual took a life of utility and attempted to turn it into a tool of spirit. This contrast, the ornate silk and gold of the queen versus the calloused hands of the companion, is the most poignant discovery of all, and where the cost of a high-status passings was paid by those at the bottom of the ladder. Scientists are now using isotopic nitrogen analysis to look at the diet of these two women. What they found was another surprise. The older woman had transitioned almost entirely to a diet of seafood, likely high-status fish and marine mammals. But the younger woman's diet remained terrestrial, based on grains and land animals. This suggests a separation of worlds even while they were living in the same hall. The queen was already of the sea, the realm of the dead in many Norse myths, long before she was placed in the ship. The companion was of the land, brought in to provide the weight and reality needed to anchor the ship's journey. The ritualistic end of the younger woman involved a specific type of binding. The fibers found around her ankles and wrists weren't just ropes. They were woven with a reverse twist, which in ancient magic was used to prevent a spirit from returning. They wanted her to go with the queen, but they didn't want her coming back as a draar, a vengeful, undead spirit. The darkness of the ritual is found in these tiny, technical details of the burial. Every knot, every seed, every drop of wax found on the deck was a part of a complex coding designed to manage the unpredictable energy of the afterlife. What does this discovery mean for us today? It forces us to move past the cartoon version of the Vikings. It shows us a people who were deeply obsessed with the architecture of the soul. They didn't just pass away, they embarked. And they were willing to commit what we would consider atrocities to ensure that the journey was successful. The preserved bodies are not just specimens. They are witnesses to a world of belief so intense that it required the blood of the living to satisfy the needs of the dead. As the ship is moved to a climate-controlled museum environment, the work continues. Every year, new techniques allow us to peer further back into the shadows. We are now looking at the microbiome of the ship, the bacteria that survived in the clay, to see what they can tell us about the environment of 1200 years ago. We are even looking at the dust inside the textiles to find traces of the original incense used during the ceremony. The dark ritual is being reconstructed grain by grain, and the picture it paints is one of a community that viewed the burial mound not as a hole in the ground, but as a portal. The younger woman, the companion nobody saw coming, has finally been given a voice. She is no longer just a servant mentioned in a footnote. She is a girl from a distant land, a weaver of cloth, and a victim of a belief system that valued the status of the leader over the life of the follower. Her presence in the ship is the ultimate evidence of the dark side of the Viking expansion. They didn't just bring back gold and silver. They brought back lives to be used as spiritual fuel. The older woman, the queen of the mound, remains an enigma. Was she a ruler? A goddess on earth? The sheer scale of her send-off suggests she was something more than just a mortal leader. She was a central pillar of the Viking world, a figure whose transition required the sacrifice of a dragon ship and the life of a fellow human. The science of her burial reveals a society that was terrifying in its conviction and breathtaking in its artistry. Opening a Viking ship sealed for 1200 years is like intercepting a message sent across time. The dark ritual revealed by the preserved bodies tells us that the Vikings were not just raiders, they were soul engineers. They were people who believed they could manipulate the fabric of eternity through sacrifice and ceremony. As we look at the silent wooden hull of the ship and the fragile remains of the two women, we are reminded that history is often much more complex and much more haunting than we ever imagined. The blue clay of Norway has given up its secret, and the world will never look at the Vikings the same way again. The researchers continue to find new details every day. They discovered a hidden cache of small wooden gaming pieces under the floorboards of the burial chamber. In Norse culture, gaming was often a metaphor for battle and for the game of life itself. Placing these pieces under the dead suggests that even in the afterlife, the game continues. The queen and her companion are still out there, navigating the spiritual fjord, playing a game that began 1200 years ago in the flickering light of a ceremonial fire. We are fortunate to live in an age where science can peel back the layers of myth to find the human reality beneath. The footage of this excavation, the 3D models of the ship, and the genetic maps of the remains are all tools that help us honor the memory of those who were lost to the dark rituals of the past. By understanding the darkness, we can better appreciate the progress we've made toward valuing every human life. The Viking ship is no longer a secret. It is a lesson, a memorial, and a window into the incredible, terrifying, and beautiful spirit of our ancestors. As the sun sets over the modern Norwegian landscape, just a few miles from where the ship was found, it's hard not to think about those two women. The queen and her companion, locked together in an oak vessel, surrounded by horses and sledges, waiting in the dark for 12 centuries. They have finally been brought into the light, and their story, the real story of the Viking ritual, is finally being told. The preservation of their bodies has given them a second life, not in the halls of Valhalla, but in the halls of science and the collective memory of the world. The dragon of the sea has finally come to rest, and its final message is one of mystery, sacrifice, and the enduring power of the human heart. The work in the lab continues. We may yet find even more startling revelations. Could there be another ship nearby? Did this queen have a king whose mound has yet to be found? The Earth still holds many secrets. But for now, the Oseberg successorship stands as the most profound and disturbing discovery in the history of the North. It is a reminder that the past is never truly dead. It is just waiting for someone to find the right way to open the door and listen to what the ancient ones have to say. The dark ritual is revealed, and the world of the Vikings is more vibrant and more real than ever before. Stay curious, because the next hole in the ground might just rewrite the entire story of humanity. Until then, Keep your eyes on the horizon and remember the ship that sailed through time to tell us the truth.